Good afternoon and welcome to this community conversation at the Center for Rural Development here in Somerset. We're glad to have a distinguished panel of guests to talk about the current events and how Somerset is responding and the issues perhaps and challenges of communities like Somerset and some good advice they can give for all of us who are dealing with these very challenging times. My name is Renee Shaw. I'm the producer, host, and managing editor of Kentucky Educational Television's Public Affairs programs, and I'm honored to be here to navigate this discussion today. Our topic, as we have framed it, is from unrest to reconciliation, and we've known that the recent string of events involving African Americans who have been involved in officer-involved deaths, that sparked a new and refreshed conversation about police brutality and about racial justice in America. And the protests across the nation are calls and demands for action. And so conversations like what's happening here today are very important for all of us, one, to understand our neighbor a little bit better, and to meet our neighbor where he or she is. And that way we can form a consensus and really build community in the way that even Dr. Martin Luther King envisioned a beloved community to be. So I want to introduce our panelists who will be speaking today and interacting on this conversation. Mayor Alan Keck, the City of Somerset Mayor. We're so glad to have him. Beside him, we have Elaine Wilson, the Somerset Community College Director of Equity and Inclusion. And beside her, we have Chief William Hunt, City of Somerset Department of Police. And to my right, we're glad to have Mr. John Perkins, retired Somerset postmaster, entrepreneur, and community leader. Jakaye Garth, Director of Sales for the Thoroughbred Hospitality Group. And last but not least, Dr. French Harmon, pastor of First Baptist Church, Somerset. We appreciate your attention to this very critical matter today, and we invite you to submit your questions on Facebook Live at Somerset CC. That's Facebook Live at Somerset CC, and we'll try to field as many questions as time allows. But first, we want to give each of our panelists just a couple of minutes to frame up how they've been thinking about these issues and the conversation that we might have today. And I'll start with Mayor Keck about, given the conversations that's happening around the nation, the compounding issue of the pandemic, how do you see the conversations going forward about police brutality, about racial justice, and specifically for the city of Somerset, are there particular issues that you'd like to focus on?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you so much, Renee, for being here. I'd also like briefly to say thank you to Somerset Community College. Elaine, your leadership, Dr. Castle and his management team, we're grateful. Not only that you would have me participate in this panel, but that you all are taking the lead in facilitating this discussion. Renee, it's an incredibly important topic. It is one that is on so many's minds and on their hearts. Before I go a little further, I'd also like to say that my heartfelt condolences are to the Barr family. Yes. As we know, Congressman Barr lost his wife, Carol, last night, and I think we need to continue to pray for that family. But as it pertains to this message of reconciliation, you know, my focus as an optimist and as a positive person is that so often when we have life's greatest challenges, we're also afforded many great opportunities. And what I see here is an opportunity to grow, an opportunity for us to listen and for us to learn. Specifically, I've been thinking a lot about a passage in the book of James. That it says that we will, in fact, it says, consider it pure joy whenever we face trials of many kinds. It doesn't say if, but when. That the testing of our faith produces perseverance. And what has been on my heart is people of color in America have persevered for far too long. The time for this discussion is now. Time for healing is now. And so my message would be one of optimism, again, one of understanding. But I want to take that glass half full approach. I want to take the silver lining approach, if you will, and there's incredible power in our perspective. And so I'm honored to be a part of this panel with other community leaders, and hopefully in Somerset, we can take the lead in that understanding and finding ways to specifically unite and not divide us further, but find ways to come together for real solutions.
Thank you for that. Ms. Wilson, I'll ask you the same to give us your thoughts generally, but when we talk about discussing, many African Americans have said that, well, we've been talking about this since 1619, for 401 years, and now's the time for action. Is that where you are?
I like to focus on how we got here in Somerset, in our county, because thank you, Mayor, for your comments, but there are many of us who have already been working together over the years to make sure that we don't have the same kind of conflict that you see in some of the other places. I hate it. Absolutely hate the conflict and the killing that's going on. Our college hates it. You know, we've come out against that. And I believe that if enough people in enough communities had the same kind of focus on working together that we do here in our area, that we wouldn't have those kind of problems. And that's what I'm banking on, that our past will take us forward.
Yeah. Chief Hunt, this is a challenging time for law enforcement. And a program I did just Monday night on KET, we talked about the issue of police reform, and that it doesn't have to be an either or. It can be a both and, that we can talk about the issues with police conduct in some cases that may involve racism, and also that protecting communities of color, that those aren't competing interests. So when you look at this issue and being on the ground as you are, a guardian of public safety, what would you like to communicate most?
Well, even though, as you said, I'm a guardian of the community, we're still real people. And we have feelings just like every person here today and watching today. And to be quite honest with you, I have a lot of mixed emotions right now. I'm not really sure what I'm feeling because I'm all over the place with this issue. But before I get into that, I do want to reiterate just briefly what the mayor spoke of. Thank Dr. Castle and Ms. Wilson with Community College, and thank the Center for Rural Development for hosting this and putting this panel together. And honestly, I'm honored to have you here in Somerset. Somebody of your notoriety to be here, I think speaks volumes to the need for these discussions to occur. So thank you for being with us. But I think first off, I want to say, I'm glad and happy that we are having these type of discussions to help move toward reconciliation. It's going to take education and people working together to get to that point. But in the same sense, I also have a feeling of hurt, sadness, confusion. Well, here in Somerset, we have a minimum of 3 events a year that actually the college helps host at least 1 or 2 of those, and usually a local church like First Baptist hosts another, but they're a celebration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, which you've actually spoken at one of those. And, some people will say a definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. We have to do more. And what saddens me is it has taken the loss of lives, human lives, to get our communities involved once again to discuss an issue that we should not have to be discussing in 2020. This issue, I wish, had been resolved many years ago, but here we are again. So I'm kind of all over the place. But another thing that you mentioned about being guardians and with law enforcement is this time is different to me. I've seen something different that I don't know that I've ever seen, and that is whether you are African American community or any other minority community or you're law enforcement or your government, I've not seen anyone condone what happened on this issue. No one is defending it. And we profoundly denounce racism in our department and in our community, and we have a great community here. So I think it's just imperative that we continue to have these discussions, continue to build relationships, so if there is conflict, once you have relationships with people, it's much easier to resolve things.
Thank you, Chief. Very well said. Mr. Perkins, I'll come to you. You've had several occupations in your life and contributions to this great community. And I'm curious, your position as an African American man, when you watch the video of George Floyd and you read the stories about Breonna Taylor, And you're in a community where the minority population isn't as large as it is in Louisville or Fayette County. I really want you to frame how this moment has affected you personally and what you would like to communicate most to those who are watching and listening.
I grew up here in Somerset when it was a 2-lane road, and not a lot to do, but it was a different time then when we all stuck together as families, red, yellow, black, and white, because basically the only thing we had in common was trying to survive and trying to make it. And we would fight every day to get through communities to go to school, but it wasn't about black and white, it was about protecting your turf. In my 71 years, I've seen a lot of change, but I've never been hurt as badly as seeing young black men being, for lack of a better word, lynched on TV. And I don't cry easily, but I get emotional because I served in Vietnam for 18 months. And ever since this country was formed, the white, the red, the black, the brown man has spilled blood for this continent. And yet, for some reason, we're considered less than. It hurts me to think that someone would mistreat me or mine because of the color of my skin. But I think it all begins at home with the way we teach our children, black and white, red, whatever. You know, prejudice isn't something we're born into. Prejudice is something that's taught. Kids don't know any different other than maybe I may be a little darker than them or whatnot, unless somebody tells them there's a difference. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I want to convey to people here in the community, a lot of people talk about white privilege. I've seen it all my life. We as black folks here in Somerset and all over the world, we've had to kind of bend to pacify or placate the white man. And you know, when you grow up all your life doing that, you lose a little of your self-dignity. So I think as a black man, the most important thing that we can do is that we can teach our children the right way. You know, there's a thing that Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white. They are precious in his sight. And I think that's what we have to live by. Now, I'm going to sit here and tell you as a black man that I have prejudices, but I try to see beyond those. And there's no one in this community, I don't care their socioeconomical background, the color of their skin or whatnot, and I can speak for my family, that we're going to mistreat. If you come to our door and you need something, or if we see you on the road broken down, we're going to help you. And that's the majority of folks right here in Pulaski County. But Pulaski County is just a small segment of this world. And what goes on in Brooklyn and New York and those places, it doesn't go on here, basically because of the generations of our families being intertwined. You know, when Alan was running for mayor, I didn't know Alan, but my brother knew Alan and his family, and on and on and on. The chief of police, his father-in-law and I are just like brothers. And Jakaye and Reverend, I'm not good at names, but I told him when I came in that I appreciate what he's done for this community. Everybody sitting up here has been a positive force for this community. But what we as individuals have to do, we have to hold ourselves accountable, and the kids and grandkids and whatnot that we raise to treat everyone the way that they want to be treated. Now, we're at a stage now that I hadn't seen in my lifetime. And all the protesting and demonstrations and stuff, you see the white, the red, the black, the brown folks out there, in a lot of instances more white than the other colors. So everybody is ready for change, but what we have to do is we have to stop paying lip service to it, and we have to step up and take responsibility in our space. I can't be responsible for Elaine. I've got to be responsible for me. But each one of us as human beings, we have to step up and do what we think is right. Yeah. There's no in between. There's no gray area. What's right is right and what's wrong is wrong.
And to that point, Ms. Garth, and I thank you, Mr. Perkins, for that, because one of the things we've heard is there's a lot of momentum and there's a lot of energy in the protests, and it is very reflective of the United Nations, right? There are different races and ethnicities joined in this movement, folks who had never, ever been before engaged in social justice matters, who are now finding themselves, because of the videotape of George Floyd, now engaged. But many people think that come the second wave of a pandemic, if that's what happens, or come a foreign policy crisis, if that were to happen, or come another pandemic level crisis in America, it would upstage what is happening right now in America. Do you fear that this will be a flash in the pan response, that all of the energy is there now, but it will soon dissipate when something else captures the attention and minds of Americans?
First of all, I want to thank you for being here with us today, and thank everybody for allowing me to be on this panel. When I first got word that I was going to be on the panel, I thought, I'm going to be up here with people who I look up to, and what is it that I can bring to the table? So what I did was reach out to my community, and that was actually the biggest response that I got. They told me, do not let this stop. Do not let one event happen here in Somerset and Pulaski County and then nothing go on after that. And that was the biggest piece of advice that I got from my local community, was that we have to continue. This has to be a year round. So as far as being fearful if something else comes, I don't fear that, because I think that my community is striving to make this a continuation. With that being said, I also asked my community for goals. What kind of goals do you see, or do you want to see our community to work towards? And I got all different kind of responses, but I started to see a trend. So I actually put together, when thinking about moving from unrest to reconciliation, I put together 5 steps that I feel like that we can use to move forward and to continue these conversations. And I'll briefly go over those. The first and the main thing I believe we need to do is education and re-education. People, we need to be educated about our local community and about American history and the truth about that. We get very little education on the nasty side of American history. And I think we need to be educated on that. We need to start educating our children on that more. And we also need to do some re-education. People need to understand, what is offensive and what is not offensive when it comes to the Black community, and things that you should, and should not say to them. The second step would be acknowledgement. And we need to acknowledge that just because it's not happening to you does not mean it's not happening to somebody else in your community. And to be an ally for this movement, you have to recognize that it may not be happening to you, but it may be happening to your neighbor. They may be feeling prejudice, or they may be feeling discrimination. So you have to step up and acknowledge that, and then stand in their shoes. The third step would be representation. Especially here in Somerset and Pulaski County, we are way more diverse than what people realize. And we do see some of that diversity represented in our business community, but not the Black community. There aren't a lot of Black businesses. There aren't a lot of Black people in leadership positions here in Somerset. And I think we need that representation. But I think to be represented, we have to be involved. And that's my fourth step. I challenge the Black community today to be involved in your community, even if it's just coming out to local community events, to seek those leadership programs or seek those leadership roles and start a business. And so I challenge you to become involved so that we can be represented. And then the fifth step would be unity, would be moving forward. Once we can educate and acknowledge, once we can be represented and we can be involved, then we can unify and then we can come together and move forward to a future.
Good thinking.
Thank you.
And thank you for that. Was an excellent distillation of, I think, some very positive action steps and doable action steps. And I want to go to Dr. Harmon because I think about the place that the faith community has in every step that she just laid out for us: education, acknowledgement, representation, involvement, and unity. And particularly that last part, unity. The faith community probably is best able and equipped to, as disciples of Christ, right? Mm-hmm. To make sure that unity is the end goal. Your thoughts about what you've heard so far and about what you would like to see moving forward.
I echo what everyone else said. Thank you, Renee, for coming, and Elaine Wilson for organizing the panel, Dr. Castle, and others who were involved. Wow, what a time. And everyone spoke so eloquently. Wonderful. And I was really moved by Johnny's words. And you're right. I believe, Renee, the church has a lot to say about unity. And the church has been part of our country. And I want to look right in this camera and talk to some of the young people and some of the organizers in the future. You need the church. You need pastors and preachers and people of faith to help you in your quest for achieving success, overcoming injustices. Just remember, Martin Luther King was a Baptist preacher, above all. And one of the words he said that speaks to me so often is that we either live together as brothers or we perish together as fools. And our community has been blessed, Renee, with having unity services. And in those unity services, we have a unity choir. We have people of all denominations and irreligious people come and share a time together, even a fellowship meal. And that's an example of the three things I want to say. We need to listen more, and we need to learn from each other, and we need to lead. We need to lead out as a church, as a faith community. In 2016, as part of the Unity service, we decided to have a African-American scholarship for Somerset Community College students, started from that Unity service. And so I'm going to ask all the pastors who may be watching, and all the people of the churches that are watching, this Sunday, we're going to do it at First Baptist Church, this Sunday, receive an offering, and instead of having one student or two students a year, let's see if we can double that or even make it larger. Let's make sure people of color have the opportunity to go to this school in our community and become the leaders that we really desperately need here. So unity is an important component, and we believe small steps can happen.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Harmon. That was beautiful.
Sure.
And, the point about the scholarships, we've seen universities and others, and there was news this morning of a multi-billionaire who's giving $140 million to historically Black colleges and universities, right? So we're seeing that. When he could be, as he's often done, given to his alma mater, said, well, okay, that's part of the white privilege, the white lens, that I didn't see beyond my own worldview. And now we know that education can be the biggest mitigator in poverty and crime and interfacing with the criminal justice system. There are studies that show that. They are building prisons based off of third grade literacy scores and tests, right? So if there's a way to infuse education and the passion for education and instill the value of education, that can be a great mitigator in a lot of these unfortunate circumstances. And I just want to hang with you just for a moment about clergy, particularly white clergy's involvement in this issue. I know that I will just speak for myself in Lexington. My pastor, who's African American, has challenged his white brothers to be more involved, to be more engaged beyond just the occasional inclusive unity service, but to do what you're talking about. So how do you get, if you have mostly a predominantly white congregation, to see the value of looking beyond their lens to helping people of color, not just because this is the fad thing to do at the moment, but because it's what Christ would call us to do?
I've told this story before, and I think there needs to be, as we were talking here, a re-education. One of the best things that ever happened to me was when I was in college. I was going into the ministry, but I took a variety of courses, including politics, political science. Mm-hmm. And I had a professor that challenged all of our students to get out of our comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And so he invited me to attend an NAACP meeting. And so I went to an NAACP meeting. I was the only white person there. Mm-hmm. And what I have told before, and I'll tell here again, I've never been treated better in my life. There was an elderly woman that came and gave me some candy and welcomed me. And the point is, we do need some re-education of not just clergy, but we need to listen to each other.
Right.
We need to get the clergy to understand really the 11 o'clock hour on Sunday, we see a big divide in our communities. We need to work together. So I would suggest to all the clergy to have listening sessions, active listening sessions, encourage participation, and expect change and expect tough questions. And it's not always going to be easy. I didn't think I was going to say this, but I'm going to say it since we're being transparent here. My son attends University of Kentucky, and this year he was in an apartment with 4 people, and he was the only white person. I think it starts at home.
Right.
I think we all have to learn. We have to teach our children that prejudice is a sin,
Right.
and we need to be inclusive of people.
Yeah. And we do have to meet people where they are, when they're not as far along as your dear son, who you've taught well, right? That everyone's experience, particularly in more remote areas where there may not be so much integration, we have to help them along, right? And not condemn them from not understanding an experience that they haven't had. And I think that's very hard to do, because I think perhaps people want other people to be at a certain place, and they're just not there yet. Chief Hunt, I want to go back to you, and I want to share with you, and I know you've heard this before. I'm not a parent, but I have cousins, and I have beloved men in my life and little ones who I've tried to mentor. And I've had to have what's called the talk with them. The talk that even when they're not even close to driving age, if you come across a police officer, we talk about their countenance, their demeanor, their presentation. And if they are behind the wheel of a car and they get pulled over, already have your license out and your registration out, your hands on the steering wheel. I mean, I don't know if white parents have that talk with their kids, but black parents do. Mm-hmm. I just want to get your response to how does that sit with you when a segment of the population appears to go through an enormous amount of extra lesson teaching to just ensure their survival when they interface with police officers?
Well, I kind of debated sharing this story, but as Pastor said, if we're going to be transparent and we're going to make a difference, we got to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
And some of what you just explained, I've heard from Mr. Perkins and his family because we're friends and we talk about these things. But what some people probably would never expect is I've had to have talk with my children too, but on a different issue. We recently had a candlelight vigil here in Somerset for some of the recent deaths that's caused this movement. And my daughter wanted to go with me. And I wanted my daughter to go with me. I wanted her to be educated and learn and see her father standing up against something that is so evil. But I was fearful for my daughter to go because she's the police chief's daughter.
Oh, wow.
And it's a whole nother twist to it that a lot of people, when I say that, they've never expected that.
Right.
I went to that event practically unarmed with no body armor, basically let the curtains down and was vulnerable. So to bring my daughter there, I felt we needed to have a conversation. It's not the first time law enforcement officers have to have conversations with their children.
Right.
I've been in Walmart or Kroger and been walking with my family and seen somebody starting to approach me that I had to fight the night before. And I've had to give code words to my wife to say, if I say this, you take the children and get away from me. And that night with my daughter, I had to explain to her, I want you to go and I want you to learn. This is important that we learn about this issue. But also, we didn't know this wasn't a planned event. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know who was going to be there. Not everyone that goes to protest go to be peaceful. So I had to explain to my daughter, if anything goes bad, first of all, I don't want you near me. I want you back out on the outside watching. And if something goes bad, I gave her a plan to run, where to run, and to call her mother to pick her up. So I cannot say I understand someone of the African American community having that conversation, but in a little bit of a way, I can relate. But here's what's unfair about how I can relate. When I go home, unless you know me, I can take this uniform off. People of the African American community cannot go home and change the color of their skin. Exactly. So it saddens me to a degree that we have to, it does sadden me, that we have to have those conversations. But I think it's responsible to also have those conversations for our children.
Right.
I hope we get to a point in our community, in our world, that we no longer have to have those conversations. And in Somerset, Kentucky, I don't think it's as needed as it is in, I'll just say, much larger metropolitan cities. I actually had a lunch this week with Jakaye and an African-American minister of our community, and his son was visiting Somerset. And he called his father because he got pulled over. And he was fearful because he wasn't from here. And when the officer was speaking to him, the pastor kept telling him, it's okay, just do what you're supposed to do, just like they'd had the discussion. And without saying names, the officer said, no, wait a minute, you're so-and-so son, aren't you? And the young man just calmed at that point. Because that goes back to, I can't say enough how important it is to continue to build these relationships. Because one thing I've noticed with people, they fear what they don't know and what they don't understand. And it's so important that we continue to work toward education.
Yeah. Thank you, Chief Hunt, for your transparency. Because I think it's important that when we talk about celebrating and appreciating humanity and human life, that we don't forget that law enforcement is part of that humanity.
Right.
And part of our human existence that we need to also make sure is protected and shielded from harm. So I thank you for sharing that. This is probably one of the most transparent panels I've ever moderated, to be quite honest. And so I do appreciate you
Welcome
all
to
being
Somerset.
Yeah.
Yes, welcome to Somerset, right? I should have known. That's how you all are here, and I'm so appreciative of that. Mayor, I want to come back to you. You've got some good folk here, without a doubt. And there seems, I'm not going to say seems, there is an altruistic motivation behind the work here that's tough. If you ever had to handle a situation like a Breonna Taylor, I'm sure there would never be a situation of a George Floyd, but we don't know, right? How would you go about it? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I was actually preparing for you to ask me that, and I typically don't like to answer hypotheticals
Sure.
because we can go down rabbit holes
That's
of
right.
hypotheticals.
I understand that.
First of all, I think you have to show ultimate compassion for the victims first and foremost. I'll say with transparency, because I love him like a brother and I trust him like family, that I would put a lot of stock in what Chief Hunt says. Now, I can't speak to other police chiefs throughout the Commonwealth, but I do know his heart. I know his distinguished track record of service. I know the ways in which he has trained our police department, specifically to the George Floyd incident. As I thought through that, I know without an ounce of hesitation that even if there were one person in our PD that would do that, which I don't believe is the case, that the men and women around that person would not allow it. Mm-hmm. They would stand against it, and I have no doubt. At the end of the day, when mistakes are made, I believe in extreme ownership. And that starts with me. In this community, if something were to happen, you don't pass the buck. And that's how I would handle it. I wouldn't look to Chief Hunt to fall on a sword for me. At the end of the day, I'm the mayor and the leader of this community. I'm the chief public servant.
Right.
And when things are good, and things are good here right now, we're blessed. I mean, you look at the panel, as you said it, the team that I have at the city, the people in this community. I mean, you know, Mr. Perkins told a small story about me, but I've looked up to him as a legend. I love the fact that he voted for my opponent, and we talked for an hour. Listen, we talked for an hour in his living room after that because he wanted to invest in me.
Right.
And I went back to him 4 years later and asked for the same thing, and now he tells the story that he supports me and believes in me, and I love him for it. But I'm blessed to serve.
You had to earn that vote,
I did.
right?
I did. And if I run again, maybe he'll believe in me this time. I think he will. I don't mean to steer from the hypothetical question because it's so
I
important.
understand. Yes.
But I want, Dr. Harmon mentioned we need folks who are going to listen and learn, but he also said lead.
Right.
And we need public servants who are willing to have that extreme ownership and that are willing to make tough choices when things go wrong. And I would hope I'd lead in that manner.
Yeah. I want to go back to you, Chief Hunt, just real quickly. How have perhaps the conversations you've had with your men and women on the force in light of the recent developments, what kind of talks are you having with them?
Well, to be honest, we haven't had a lot of talks because I've been extremely busy working from my office during this. I think one thing that most people, if they know me in this community, they know who I am, they know my morals, and they know my values. And by saying that, I think part of law enforcement, it begins with the leadership. And anyone that knows me, whether you work for me or you don't, knows that I do not condone or stand for that and will not accept it within our agency. Not even in no locker room joking, nothing. It's unacceptable. And to go back to the couple of cases you mentioned there, you know, the Breonna case, I don't know the investigation yet. I don't know a lot of the facts, but a big focus of that is on the no-knock warrant. Mm-hmm. But with the George Floyd incident, you know, that people keep referencing a chokehold. That wasn't a chokehold. No. We're not taught, and I don't know about Minnesota, but here we don't teach that.
Right.
That is not taught, and it's not condoned. But as much as saddens not the word, as much as that infuriates me with what that officer did with him, what saddens me is what the other three officers did not do. Mm-hmm. Because as law enforcement officers, one, we have to earn, in today's time, the respect and the faith of our communities. And once you lose it, it's hard to get back. But what upset me and saddened me about those three officers is one of the main things we should be doing is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Mr. Floyd could not protect himself at that time, and they did not act, or they did not act appropriately. And it was their inaction that saddens me.
Yeah. Ms. Wilson, I want to come to you and talk about higher education's role in being as the intellectual pillars that higher ed institutions are, beyond just workforce development and degree earning. There is a space and a place for higher ed institutions to be the bridge builders.
Correct.
Right, of these kind of very difficult and sometimes uncomfortable and courageous conversations. From the perspective of Somerset, and we think about, and I'll take it outside of Somerset, but when I think about offices of diversity and inclusion that we have throughout, of course, Kentucky and through the nation, I think some of them have power and some of them do not.
Right.
And there is a perception among some students, faculty, staff, and community leaders that those institutions, parts of those institutions, are token institutions. It looks good for the administration to have that. It looks like they're serving the communities of color and those who come from disadvantaged positions in life. I just wanted your take on how offices like yours, and even the college as a whole, can advance the whole goal of reconciliation further than where it is right now.
We have, as I've spoken about before, various events that involve many people in the community. And we, by being who we are and what we are in the community, all of these folks show what kind of way we expect other people to learn from us. We have people who pull together no matter what, and we are educating people by showing them that this is where we are. Some of the things that the college will do is, of course, support these efforts. But we also have the responsibility to educate on a larger scale the whole community, but we have to start with our students and the people who work there. I spend time doing diversity sessions with different classrooms. When I get an opportunity, I talk with students at our campus or people who are not. For instance, I have spoken to students at our Laurel campus about diversity because that's part of us. I have also spoken to Upward Bound students who are not students of the college yet, but we make sure that people know that the college is interested in our moving forward. Now, one of the things that one of the things that we for sure want to do at the college is make sure that we have diversity included in all the syllabi for all the classes. And that's one of our goals. That's one of the things that we're working on. We also want to make sure that we have conversations perhaps that are comfortable or not comfortable for people because of some of the things that may or may not have happened in some of the classrooms. I've been told about different people's ideas coming forth in classrooms that may make other people feel uncomfortable. Well, that's okay if everybody is on the same page and we're not going to come to blows because I think differently from you. The college has done some other things as far as leadership is concerned. We have gender neutral restrooms. That's not everywhere. We believe that everybody ought to have the right to what they believe in. So we have done some things, but I would like, of course, to see us do more, perhaps have these forums every quarter to get back together with different people involved and get ideas like Jakaye has done from the folks that listen to her and believe in her leadership like we do, obviously. I would like to see us all work together again, working together, building relationships in order to get the word out to everybody about what the college would like to see. Now, one of the things I learned a long time ago is that there are over 200 churches in this community and in the county. And if there is some way that we can get the message that we want out to all people who go to the churches, everybody does not, it would be a start as far as getting word out that this is what we would like to see in our community. We have had the gatherings with the first responders, which I think are great. You know, our church has taken the leadership in a number of things here. So we've got churches doing it. We can have the college also going shoulder to shoulder with people in the community to make some things happen, including increasing the scholarships, including having a welcoming atmosphere at the college where people of color want to come. Mm-hmm. We want that. We want people of all different ilks to be there. We know they're here. Just like Jakaye said, we've got all kinds of people who live here, but we need to make sure that they know that we want them.
So we've gotten some very positive comments on Facebook. I'll just quote these. Everybody is ready for change, but we have to step up and be responsible for change. Higher education is key is another comment, and scholarships are needed. However, money won't solve the racial inequity. So, and we've said that same thing for when it comes to education. I mean, you can always, money isn't always the be all and end all, God bless you, when it comes to our societal ills. But I do want to come back over to this side of the table and Mr. Perkins, ask you, you know, what does reconciliation look like? When you talk to Chief Hunt, if you were to go to the police force and you were to do a workshop with them, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, first of all, that even with the scope of what they have to do, that his troops can't be psychologists, they can't be social workers, that they have their hands full as it is, and that we need to have something in place to where we can assist them to make their job easier. And then the other thing is that there are people here in this community that they're invisible to a certain extent. And basically what happens with them, they come out at night. Or if there's empty houses, which Chief knows, they're in those and this, that, and the other. So we have to meet people on their level. You know, a lot of times I'm intimidated if I go someplace, well, you know, just to bring it up, a lot of folks here, because there aren't a lot of black folks here, when you go into a business to shop and whatnot, sometimes it's like that they aren't as accommodating as they should be, because really they aren't familiar with us. You know, they don't see enough of us. And I think that if we were to hold a workshop, it would be to include just about every facet of the population as we could. Even, you know, some people that are homeless or whatever, because we need to get their ideas and their perception of what's needed in this community. A lot of times because of, as you brought up before, money and status and this, that, and the other, a lot of the folks that really need the help are overlooked because they don't have a voice. So I think everyone needs to have a voice, and if you were going to have a workshop, just like Jakaye said, we need to get input from the community, which the chief does with the committee that I serve on. But most of all, a lot of folks in the community need to know who the police are, who the sheriff's department are, and basically that they're there to enforce the law, but they're there to assist you if you need help. And we do a lot of that. You know, I know there's instances where they could lock people up or this, that, and the other, and they'll take them out to lunch, or, you know, they make sure that the needs are met. But that's why Somerset, Pulaski County is a unique place. And it's a unique place in the sense that it's easy for me to sit here and say we're all family, but we are. I'm serious. Everybody here, we touch each other in some kind of way. And I think that's why we don't have the problems. We don't have the problems because we nip it in the bud before it starts. You know, one of my biggest things is and I'll probably get some stuff on Facebook, which I don't care. I hate the Confederate flag because of what it stands for. You know, what's the old adage, the South will rise again? Well, to me, the South meant slavery. If it's to rise again, that means that they don't want to see my people push forward. And little kids, I grew up with that stigma, so I can't get comfortable with that. So the only flag that we follow here that I think we should follow is the flag of the United States of America. That Confederate flag doesn't mean anything to me, just like if I flew the flag, the Black Freedom flag. We're all one family. We all answer to one flag. And the division in this country right now, a lot of it's political, but if I don't even listen to my radio now because of people running for office. And here in Pulaski County, the first words out of their mouth is, I'm conservative and I don't believe in abortion. That's fine and dandy. But what I want to hear, are you going to take care of me and my family? Are you going to give me the stuff that where I can feed my family, to where I can employ my family? And Democrat and Republican, we're too political. We need to focus on what's good for our constituents. I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican. Just like that man, I don't care what he is, because he takes care of this community. I don't care what the chief is, or you know, and that's what it's reaching out and letting people know that because of all of your faults, all of the flaws that you have, that I don't care what you look like or what your political affiliation is or whatnot, I'm going to treat you the same way that I want to be treated.
Ms. Garth, I want to return to you. I think you brought up the words white privilege.
I think it was.
Or was it maybe, okay, was it Mr. Perkins? Well, okay, I'm going to target it to you.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Because I do think that once we have these very kind of broad-based discussions that are really a template, that I could take this conversation and I could go back to Fayette County, have the same conversation, ask the same questions, get very similar answers. Mm-hmm. But drilling down into the nuance, right, and bringing up these lexicons that may be unfamiliar to the majority population, such as white privilege, such as code meshing, code switching that African Americans do to assimilate into different environments. I mean, when you talk about education and re-education, I'm just interested in knowing, do you mean that? Do you mean bringing up these kind of taboo lexicons that really only the African American community has embraced and talked about?
Yeah, I think that's very important, because I think people need to have an understanding of both sides. I believe I'm biracial. My mother is white. My father is black. And she tells me all the time, she can walk out of her door as a white woman, and until she brings along me and my sister, she gets no issues from the community. She gets no looks, you know, she gets no comments. And that, she will admit, is her white privilege. I think another issue, as you're speaking on, is colorism. That is very prominent within the black community itself, because if you're lighter skinned, then you're not as black, or if you're darker skinned, maybe you're not conceived as to be as pretty. So as far as education goes, what we have to do is really stop looking at each other's differences as such a negative. We have to look at each other, and I wanted to go back to just a few things that we were talking about that I think would answer your question as well. I read my Bible app, and I did a plan on unity a couple weeks ago. And the definition that they gave was a group of people who are characterized by a shared purpose, vision, or direction. It's not about being the exact same, but about advancing towards the same goal. Mm-hmm. And what I think is important about that as well is we have to embrace and learn from each other's differences. And Chief Hunt and I talked about this the other day with the story he told about his daughter. It may not be exactly the same as what a Black family feels when they have to have those conversations with their children, but it's a common ground. We have to identify those commonalities that can bring us together. And, you know, if you feel this way about one thing, well, why don't you tell me a story that's made you feel the same way? It may not be the exact same context, but you have those same feelings, and we need to identify those commonalities between everybody in our community. And going back to education, I also believe it's important to educate about our local Black history. You know, I was born and raised here. I went to Hopkins, Meese, and Somerset, and it wasn't until I graduated college and moved back until that I learned about the Black history that happened just right here in Pulaski County. So I think we need to educate about that. And I also think that we need to understand, you know, whenever I was in school, I learned about the United States being a melting pot. And I always perceived that as such a positive thing, and that we were proud to be a melting pot. We were proud to have diversity. And as I've gotten older, I realized two things: that I don't think we're as proud of that as it's just so happened because it's based off of invasions and slavery and immigration. That's how we became a melting pot. So I think we need to understand, you know, that we have so much diversity, and we need to learn from each other's differences, and we need to educate, you know, and you need to be able to sit down and listen to what I'm saying, and I need to be able to sit down and listen to what you're saying.
Yeah. So, Dr. Harmon, I think that Ms. Garth just gave us a Sunday school lesson right there on how we should love thy neighbor. And you pegged it first in the very beginning about listening to each other, that's so important. I'm curious, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, and I think this might be the last question. I hope you can kind of bring it all home for us here. But I know that that's a charged term, Black Lives Matter. Neely Bendapudi, who is the president of the University of Louisville, has said before she was on my show Monday night that saying Black Lives Matter is not negating the other lives. It's just like if you have breast cancer, and breast cancer matters to you at that moment. Doesn't mean that the other cancers aren't as important. But at this moment, when there's that sickness and that disease that's ravaging your body, that's what matters in the moment. And so I'm curious about how you would approach, you know, the chance of Black Lives Matter. Do you embrace that? And do you maybe sermonize to your congregation about the real meaning of what that is?
Well, I think we all acknowledge all lives matter. Police lives matter. Black lives matter. White people's lives matter. But this is a unique moment in time. And to not acknowledge that is to bury your head in the sand. I recently watched a program on 1968. Mm-hmm. It was a wonderful documentary. And that was the year that Martin Luther King was assassinated. And that was the year that Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. That was the year that they had the upheaval in Chicago. Right. There were truly, you know, cities burned. And so this might be our 1968.
Right.
What do? We have to listen and learn and lead. And when we lead, that means we look for common ground where we can get together. And I think I'm going to go an area that might make a few people uncomfortable. But God needs to be brought into this conversation again and again and again. When I listen to Dr. King's speeches, when I listen to his recordings, he talked about the Word of God. He asked the men and women to pray and to protest peacefully. And he was amazing. And I'm inspired by him and so many of the words that he said, and I keep going back to them. One of the things he said, that darkness is only overcome by light, and hatred is only overcome by love. And we need to experience the infusion of God's love. And I hope that people will listen to that. I'm not going to preach a sermon here, Renee, about where our country is falling away from God. But I would encourage people to look to God, look to his scriptures. And yes, Black lives do matter. And we need to include conversations and listening sessions and acknowledge from all parties that everybody matters. Yeah. De Tocqueville came to America and he said, what made America great? He asked that question. He went to the harbors, he went to the cities, he went to the Congress. But he said it wasn't until he went into the churches and he heard the sermons from the pastors that he saw what made America great. And so I would encourage this panel to lead out and everybody watching to do what we can to remember faith has a role in solving this solution, solving this problem, as well as prayer. Prayer is the universal language, and we need to use it more and more.
Dr. Harmon, great words to end on. I think we could all make a collective amen. And there is a psalm that talks about, and I don't remember which number, that talks about that righteousness and justice are foundational to God's glory, and that God is a God of justice. And I think the other message to the church is they like the righteous part, but they're not so convinced that the justice part is part of the gospel and part of the mission of God's children. And I think we've all been to school today, and I appreciate every single one of you. Mayor Keck, thank you for the warmth and kindness you've shown me on a personal level. And to Elaine Wilson, thank you for the invitation to be here. President Castle, thank you for allowing this platform for this very important discussion, and for the college that's taking a stand and taking a stake. Chief Hunt, my gratitude to you for the service that you sacrificially render to this community and the example that you're setting for law enforcement. Bravery, sir, has many dimensions when it comes to you, and I applaud you for your service and your commitment to not just your work, but to protect us in all other ways and manners. Dr. Harmon, thank you for being here, for reminding us of the importance of the faith community and clergy in this discussion. And Miss Garth, thank you for giving us those 5 points of light, I think we will call it. And I'm going to revisit those. And I think hopefully that will give us all instruction, education, acknowledgement, representation, involvement, and unity. And I know that Dr. Harmon's work is all about that 5th condition. And finally, to you, Mr. Perkins, thank you for being a trailblazer in many ways and for laying the foundation for this community to be as embraceful as it is of all the diversity that it has. It has been my unique pleasure and honor to be here. And I hope that you'll go back and watch this conversation on Facebook, not just once, not just twice, but with your children, your grandchildren, and your community. Because together, if we just listen close enough, we'll get there in due time. And we can get there together because we are in this together. I'm Renee Shaw. Thank you for watching, and have a blessed day.